Lord have mercy. Ooh, wee, Lord.
The deadly Thanksgiving fire is classified as a homicide.
The lighter fluid was placed into his mouth, and he burned to death.
I've never witnessed something so horrific before.
I ain't got time for these lies, okay?
You think I poured some damn gas on this man?
Do you want to rule out everything before you charge a person?
You need to start getting your story straight, and you need to be straight right now.
You just trying to get me out of here so you can move that bitch in here.
If you get charged with half the murder, they will kill you.
She is evil, hateful, and lowdown. All of the above.
Lord have mercy. Ooh, wee, Lord.
It was Thanksgiving Day. I remember buckling in my son in his car seat, and next thing we know, that house right across the street from us is smoking a whole lot. So I immediately called 911.
Is this Brownlee house?
Yeah.
We arrived at the fire scene within minutes of 911 call. I witnessed 2 windows that had been breached, smoke coming out of them, smoke coming from the roof. The fire just got some air, it's really burning, and we got our work cut out for us.
My family, they come outside, and I remember hearing that somebody was indeed in the house. So at this point, our hearts dropped.
The most important thing is to get the victims out. We looked for a point of entry into the house, which on this house was going to obviously be the front door. They went in searching for the victim, trying to search thoroughly each room and bedroom for occupants. They searched the house until they made it to a bedroom. They found the victim in the bed. He was in the room where the fire was breaching out of the windows. He was within 10 feet of those windows. The bed was heavily consumed with fire. It was clear that he had passed away.
Me being from West Point, I just knew William Brownlee to be a respectful person. He was a church-going guy. He was 62 years of age. He had multiple sclerosis.
William Brownlee Sr., he lived there with his daughter-in-law, Latoya, and his son, William Brownlee Jr. William Brownlee Sr. was bedridden, and they both were taking care of him because of some health issues he had going on at the time. I just hated that fact that, hey, there was somebody that was in the house. That was a very difficult moment, and it was horrific.
I had never smelled someone burning. It is an indescribable smell, like you just couldn't even imagine.
He was bedridden. He didn't even have a chance to get up or try to escape the room. He was just there to suffer.
My gut was telling me something's really, really strange here. The fire was almost completely in William Sr.'s bedroom. The rest of the house was just heavily smoke damaged.
From the bed to where Mr. Brownlee laid and the wall right above his head, all of it was heavily burned, way worse from how it was on the other side of the room. And then I saw where the outlet, it was very heavily burned.
That seems very suspicious because it was a very new house. It was built 2 years before prior. They're built with modern wiring.
And to really cause the damage that it did, electrical fire just alone would not make this fire angry like it did. You definitely want to get down to the bottom of what went wrong for this fire to become fully engulfed in this one particular room.
I remember going to the back porch of the home. There where I found a lighter fluid bottle, and I took it into evidence.
I believe that the fire chief, he was pretty much confident that something went wrong in that room. He believed something was started for that fire to get so hot in certain areas that he wanted to go ahead and call the state fire marshal.
Latoya, she showed up in her vehicle. She gets out her car. She's crying. She's hysterical.
What we learned from the initial contact with Miss Latoya Brownlee was she had been visiting family for Thanksgiving before this incident took place. Then she left and went shopping with her auntie, Miss Virgie Gardner.
And that's when she got the call that the house was on fire. So she came back to the home. With it being Thanksgiving Day, you would think that everybody would have been together. And that left me wondering in my mind, okay, something else is going on here. It was almost like you just knew, like something just wasn't right.
Take the seat right there.
Biggest question was if this fire was actually intentionally set, and the next question was, if it was, why?
Can you give me a rundown of yesterday and what all took place?
All my brothers met at my house, and after that, we was going to my mom's house in Pontotoc in order to have Thanksgiving dinner. So my wife left home first before I did. She went to dinner in Uno over her family's house. So I got a call about 4:26. Is when I actually got the call that my house was fully engulfed in flames.
Who gave you the call?
Tony Harris. He asked me where I was and told me I need to get to my house as soon as possible, that my house was on fire.
But did your wife ever call you at any time?
No.
Can you state your wife's name for the record?
Latoria Janae Brownway.
Okay, how long y'all been married?
18 years. Actually, I was filing for divorce next week.
Did she know about this?
Yes. I had an eviction notice for her.
Right.
We're still under the same roof,
Right.
but I moved on with my life and started, seeing someone else. And she is pregnant. I said, now by the time the child is born, yes, my child will be living under the same roof as me.
The fact that now she was being evicted from the house by him, and there would be an eviction hearing to have her removed from the house. Very important piece in this investigation.
So, when did all the problems and stuff start occurring?
Been occurring for many, many, many years. She tried to actually burn the house down 3 years ago. I stayed in Laker Road. Mm-hmm. I had a trailer there. I found burn marks on the wall on the sheetrock.
I learned before living with Mr. Brownlee Sr., Junior Brownlee, his wife, Latoria. They stayed in an old trailer. Junior Brownlee claims she tried to burn an outlet to start a fire. He said she used a plant to put it by an electrical outlet and light it up.
But she said that she didn't. I didn't actually call the police, but I will go to my grave believing that she done that.
Mm-hmm. Her and your dad get along pretty well?
I mean, yes. Yeah, she used to, but since we've been going through our problems, she'll do anything to hurt me. Mm-hmm. So by hurting him, she knows it hurts me.
If she got that angry before to try to start a house fire, she could have possibly got angry again to do the same.
Your dad was the owner of that house?
Yes, my dad was the owner.
Your dad was?
My dad was the owner.
9 times out of 10, if something was to happen to your dad, you was going to get the house.
I was going to get the house.
We are going to go over here to the house. Fire marshal going to be able to tell us where the fire started at.
You will know that today? Hopefully.
Should, hopefully.
The deputy fire marshals ruled out that it was any kind of electrical problems with the home. He basically told me that the fire was started by someone.
After going through the scene and examining like he did, he was also adamant that that fire started in that room. Now we have an intentional fire, and this is a murder investigation. So now we have a suspect that we need to find.
We began to look into the insurance claim. It went even over $20,000 policy. I didn't see enough there for that to be a motive coming from William Brownlee Jr. But on Latoria's hand, I looked at the fact of you got this divorce situation. Pretty sure she was very upset. At that moment, she most definitely was a suspect for me.
I have Miss Virgie Gardner.
Gardner, yes.
You may run down how you and your niece came in contact yesterday.
We had Thanksgiving dinner, and after the dinner, we left coming to West Point to go to Walmart.
Right.
But when we got in West Point, she said, take me by the house to drop off this food. We went to buy the house. This should have been like, what, around 4? And she got out, went in, and she came back out less than 5 minutes. And we went to Walmart. Soon as we got to Walmart, she got a call saying, smoke coming out of your house. And I'm all upset now. I said, well, is your father-in-law in the house? She said, yes. So I really got nervous then. And then I could see smoke from Walmart parking lot in the air.
Right.
We just left the house.
The store that she went to was not even a mile, if that, from the actual home.
She left at 4:05. The cell phone video that shows the fire fully engulfed at 409. That definitely raises suspicion about what took place at that house.
A house fire does not go from 0 to that in that time frame, naturally. A gas leak would have more of an explosion type situation. There's not a real natural cause that's going to allow it to burn that fast, that quick.
Basically what you're telling me, y'all left from the residence around 4:05. Now, the person called 911 at 4:10, saying the house was in flames. And I got a video showing her the house in flames at that time. That room was burning before she left.
Really? She had to sit there and find. They're going through this divorce. And I told her just last week, I said, Tora, I said, don't do nothing stupid. She said, yeah, because I was I thought about going there and putting a knife in her. So, if I was asked, do I think she capable of doing this? I would say yes. She is evil, hateful, and low down, all of the above.
The Brownlee family, they live directly across the street from my family. I've never witnessed something so horrific before.
This is a small community, and the love of each other and the respect of each other pull us together. You hate to see a community hurt. You hate to see the families hurt.
My heart just heavy because just hated that fact that, hey, there was somebody that was in the house.
Oh, have mercy.
So after she went in the house and came back out to go to Walmart, what did she say?
She was talking about him. And when you see him, you just go ahead and tell him he wrong for what he doing. Tell her, leave that alone. I said, you just do what's right.
If an uncle or auntie say something about their niece or nephew, you could take it to the bank and cash it. Domestic situations can cause people to do some crazy things because, hurt people hurt people.
At that point, I was pretty much sold on it being her, but I still had to prove it. I had to get more than just word of mouth. So I received a video that was on Facebook Live at the time that the fire started. And this was at like 4:09. The 911 call came in around 4:10, 4:11.
At 4:11, Latoya makes a post on Facebook about the Black Friday sale. You look at the time span, and it was very odd to me. I think she made that post to try to create an alibi or try to, just say, hey, I didn't set a house afire.
What's up?
How you doing?
Fine, you?
Good. All right, you do understand you're still up on the Miranda, so you're still willing to speak?
Yeah.
Okay.
Everything's pointing to her. This house was set on fire. The situation going on between her husband. She's the only one that went in the house. Now is the time we gotta get her to break and tell us the truth.
As of right now, just tell me your thoughts. Just let me know what's going on.
I hate it happened, and I love my father-in-law. I hate it happened, and I just want to know what this stemmed from. Mm-hmm. What started this fire.
All right, you left Unum Thursday around what time again?
Around 3:20, 3:30.
You left around 3:20, 3:30. Mm-hmm. What time you make it to town?
3:55.
And when you get to town, before you left Unum, was you headed home or was you headed to Walmart?
Head to Walmart.
All right, what made you go by the house?
They take my plate and I had to use the bathroom. Mm-hmm. And then I got in the house, took my plate to the kitchen, went to the bedroom to see him. He was in the bedroom. Then I was headed out. Then he asked for a piece of candy, and I gave it to him. And he said, "I smell some smoke." I said, "I smell some too." And I looked in the utility room, and I ain't see nothing burning or no smoke. Mm-hmm. And I went to the kitchen, make sure there wasn't on the eye, and I didn't see anything. And I came again, and I said, "I don't know what it is." And that was it, and I left.
You actually smelled smoke in the home, and you still left? Common sense would have been like, I need to call somebody. I need to get somebody over here and see what's going on. It didn't sit well with me doing that interview with her.
How long was you at Walmart?
We was there no time. We pulled up in the parking lot and was finna park, and we pulled back out.
Mm-hmm. So what was the reason for that?
Somebody called.
Did they call on Facebook or on your phone?
Facebook.
It should still be on Facebook. Think you got time to take a look and see? She called you at 4:11.
Okay.
And y'all stayed on the phone about 1 minute and 3 seconds, right?
I guess.
Okay. Was you on Facebook around that time?
Was I on Facebook?
Mm-hmm.
I was at Walmart, so I probably not.
You are aware that there's a Facebook post on your page that was made at 4:11 said you was in Walmart parking lot.
Okay. Yeah, I guess.
You remember that?
I can't remember the post, but.
You remember making that post?
I don't remember.
You can remember what you did inside the house for those 5 minutes. But all of a sudden, now you don't remember. I think she kind of felt like we was closing in on her. I had to go in a little harder.
From what I'm looking at, and from what the fire marshal report is saying, either you wasn't at home at 4 o'clock, or you was there when the fire started.
Well, I wasn't there when no fire started, because I don't think I...
Did you go in the room?
I went in his bedroom.
All right, did you go in his bedroom when you first got to the house, or was it right before you left?
I went to the kitchen, then I went to his bedroom.
Mm-hmm.
Then we talked, and he wanted... And then
had you used the bathroom yet, like you said?
No, I hadn't used the bathroom.
But you told me you went to the bathroom. That's the reason why I said you went to the bathroom. You never said you didn't use the bathroom.
I didn't use it. I didn't use it.
So you lied to me, say like you used the bathroom?
Well, I went to the bathroom and I didn't have to go, so I didn't go. But I did.
Listen, you need to start getting your story straight. You need to be straight right now.
Okay, I'm
because I ain't got time for these lies. Okay.
I went to the bathroom and I didn't go. And I left out of there. I went back to his room.
About how long was you in the house?
About 5 minutes. I did not see no fire, no smoke, no nothing. So you're not gonna make me say that. I did not see that, but I smelled it. I smelled it in the utility room, right in that area, the utility room and the bedroom. I smelled it.
Okay, we get that. The thing of it is, you still left.
I did.
Even though you smell smoke, whatever.
I thought it wasn't nothing because I ain't seen nothing. I left.
She continued to stick with her story over and over again. I'm still seeing the crime scene. I'm still seeing the remains of Mr. Brownlee. I'm still seeing how hot this room got. I want confessions. You still want to see if you can get her to go ahead and break.
Now I went to the kitchen, make sure that went on the stove.
Seemed like you was pretty upset with him. So you got a lot of lying going on. You better start being straight. You pretty expert in them outlets, ain't you?
No, I'm not.
You ever fooled around one before?
No, I did not.
You have?
I haven't.
Never.
Never.
You spoke with your husband?
You told me 3 years ago, back at the trailer, when y'all got into it, you went and tampered with it to start a fire on the trailer.
It was right. I didn't mess with the outlet itself per se. It was a plant right by the outlet, and I put the plant on fire. That's what I tampered with.
Oh, so that the plant was put on fire.
The plant right there by the outlet. That's what made the thing right there. But I didn't. I'd be a fool to go in and mess with this outlet and get shot. That's crazy. Right there by
So
the
how you
outlet.
set the plant on fire?
It was a mattress.
A plant? A real live plant?
No, it was an artificial plant.
And you set it on fire with a mattress?
Mm-hmm.
We all had learned that Latoya Brownlee tried to set a previous house on fire because she got mad at Junior. And now, you know, the possibility of her doing this again after getting angry with her husband could be the very thing that started this fire.
I did not
messing with stuff, so not messing with a plant.
I did not
messing with an outlet.
I did not mess with no outlet at this new house. I did not do nothing, and you ain't gonna make me say I did something. I did not do nothing.
You did it with the outlet in the trailer, though. Is that what you're telling me?
I started right there by the outlet. The outlet probably caught on fire, but I'm not gonna put no fire to this outlet like this.
At that point, I was just like, all right, we're done. She didn't admit, yes, I set the house fire. But she attached herself to the timeline that we had.
So after that interview, I could have arrested her, but I didn't want to do it just yet because I knew I needed more evidence for it to stick.
It was just like a lemon. We was just trying to get all the juice as we could get out of that lemon. And so that's why we opted to continue this investigation.
The fire was intentionally set, so you start looking for accelerants that may have been poured there. What he saw was something was poured on the glove seat, the flooring, and the bed. He had a hydrocarbon detector. The hydrocarbon detector is going to pick up a petroleum product of some type. That detected some type of petroleum product was poured. It could have been lighter fluid, it could have been gasoline.
He added an interesting fact that there was also an accelerant on a outlet across the room from the bed. There was no accident at the electrical outlet. There was no faulty electrical outlet. There was an accelerant.
Somebody poured liquid on the outlet trying to make it look like the outlet had started the fire. But it doesn't go from her being in the house at 4:07, closing the door, walking out, to what you had 2 minutes later from a naturally occurring electrical fire in a wall. It doesn't happen.
Another specific detail that he gave us that was important, that there was charring on the inside of the door of the room, but there were none on the outside.
We determined that the door had been closed during the fire. Now, at some point in time, it was opened by my guys when they were fighting the fire.
When I looked over the log, we found out there was entry at 4:02 p.m. of that day, and then there was an exit at 4:07 p.m. Latoya had already told us she went in the house alone within that time span.
You got a Facebook video at 4:09 of the fire already coming out of the home. It was on a 2-minute window there.
No one else could have went in this house but Miss Brownlee to start this fire. Everything's pointing to her.
Even though we had all the evidence that we had, I still wanted to talk to her because I still wanted that confession from her as to why she done what she done.
This is a murder investigation. Somebody lost their life. So as much as we possibly can get from her, if she was willing to talk, is what we were going to continue to get. Fire Marshal Mike Ivy and Detective Johnson were interviewing her. Of course, Mike, he would take the lead.
This is a tragedy, and it's up to us to figure out what happened. And when the investigators looked at the scene yesterday, they determined that somebody purposely set the fire. So where we're at right now is to try to figure out what happened.
When did
Now,
they fire it?
Where?
Yes.
In the bedroom where he was. The problem we've got is somebody set the fire. And we can't find anybody that was in that house other than you.
I didn't set no fire. I wouldn't harm that man. I seen him just like my daddy. And I wouldn't harm him at all. Yeah, I ain't seen no smoke and no fire in this room at all.
Okay. Did you keep any flammable liquids in the house, like paint thinner, gasoline?
He keep lighter fluid and gasoline out there, but this stuff he can keep out there.
Had you used any of it lately?
No.
Well, I don't know exactly what to tell you, but this is not going to go away.
I don't want it to go away. I want her to find out what happened because an innocent man lost his life. That fire did not start because of me.
After I saw that she wasn't budging, I moved closer because I wanted to establish a rapport with her. And I wanted to see her face. Why not? Just go ahead and lay it all out here. It was worth a shot.
Are you aware that ADT logged down the time that whenever somebody come in and whenever they leave out?
They what?
Are you aware that they log down whenever the door is open?
Yeah.
Are you aware that nobody else entered the house in between 12:30 and 4 o'clock?
And I wasn't aware of that.
And you're correct, you got home around 4.
Mm-hmm.
You went in and, matter of fact, 4:02. Got the door closed behind you. I guess they do it within like a minute time frame. The door closed behind you at 4:03. The door opens at 4:06. They got you leaving out at 4:07.
Okay.
You leave the house at 4:07.
Mm-hmm.
We got a video recorded at 4:09, 4:10 with the house blazed up. I'm talking about flame. I already bust through the window where the old man was laying. There was 2 windows right there. And your phone call that you got on Facebook, that was at 4:11. You showed it to me yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. From 4:07 to 4:11, ain't no way a fire is gonna build up that much pressure in what, 4 minutes to blow one out and then fire already shooting through the roof.
I'm getting fed up about it because it seems like y'all harassing me.
But you're not answering my question. Can you see a fire starting that fast from 4:07 to 4:11?
I don't know nothing about fires, how fast they start or whatever. I don't know. I can't answer that. I don't know how fast fires start or whatever. But I know I did not start no fire. I did not kill no innocent person, a handicapped person. I did not do that. And I will say that to the end. I did not do that.
Well, and I'm going to be honest with you. We think you did.
When I took him, when I gave him that candy, I was in the room with him. I didn't see no smoke. I didn't see no sign of no smoke, but I smelled smoke. I said, well, we'll get Junior to check in when he get here. He said, okay.
Right. And you closed the door and walked out?
No, I don't close the door. I don't close the door.
You don't close the door?
No.
All right. Now we got another problem.
What?
Because I know he didn't get out the bed and go and close the door.
That door was not closed. If I was the last one there, I know I did not close that door. And I know that he did not get out the bed and walk over and close the door.
So you ought to feel like me. It's a problem somewhere where someone closed that door. And that ought to be something you're concerned about. Who closed the door? You should also be concerned about who was in the house to set this fire. And for it to go that fast, there had to been some kind of accelerant or something poured to make it just blaze that fast. I've been doing this a long time. He's been around this a long time. This doesn't happen in 2 minutes.
I just know I didn't do it.
What I'm saying is, forget about the fire being set.
Right.
There was a fire in that room at that time, and you're putting yourself in the room. You're saying, I gave him the candy. I stood by the bed.
It wasn't no fire. It wasn't no fire in the room. I
There was.
didn't see no fire.
There
in the room.
was. There was.
I didn't see that.
There's no way you could have.
I didn't see a fire in the room, and there ain't no way I leave a person right there, handicapped person, see a fire and can't get out.
I mean, that was her story. I felt like she was gonna stick to it. So I got to dealing with just her personal life as far as her and her husband. I figured if I could play on that side of her emotions, that she would maybe get upset and actually like tell me what it was as to the reason why she did it.
But listen to me. I understand what you're going through.
Mm-hmm.
I understand your husband made you mad. Past month or so, I understand it's a lot going on. It's a lot you're dealing with. It's a lot on you.
Got nothing to do with the situation at hand.
You knew this divorce was coming up. You knew all of this. I understand that.
Me and his situation ain't got nothing to do with this situation at hand. I wouldn't have took no innocent life over my situation.
Listen, I understand that you wanted to hurt your husband. I understand that. You wanted to hurt him.
I wouldn't did that.
I understand.
I want to hurt him. I hurt him, not hurt his dad.
I understand
so
that.
I don't even put that like
you already said you wanted to hurt him before. I understand all of that. But why? Just tell me why. I know.
Okay, well, arrest me.
Tell me why you did that trailer and he made you so mad that you wanted to burn the trailer down then. Why? Why did you do it? Just tell me why. That's all I want to know.
When we was at the trailer, I had set that plant on
It
fire.
wasn't a plant.
It was a
socket in the wall.
It was a plant right by the socket on the wall.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Don't tell me what I did. I know
you did it with that socket.
No, I know what I did.
And you did it with this socket.
I know what I did. And I ain't messing with that socket.
I know.
Okay, well, arrest me. I know what I did.
Listen.
And I know I didn't harm no innocent man, crippled man that can't do nothing for themselves. I would never do nothing like that, young or old.
Well, the only thing I can say is what you're saying. This is your last opportunity. If you want to make this right and talk about, there was a fire. Forget about being there.
I didn't say no fire. No, I'm gonna stop this right here because I didn't do none of it.
Let me and him go ahead and speak for a second. We're gonna let you go.
We wanted to arrest her, but that would become risky because then she would probably lawyer up. We were still waiting on the autopsy and the lab report. We wanted to make sure that when it was time to make that arrest, we had everything set in stone to move forward.
All right, notorious. If you ain't got nothing else to talk to us about, and nothing else you want to tell us, free to go.
Okay.
I really wish you could have cleared it up more. That's part of it.
That is what it is. That's what happened. So there ain't nothing else I can say about it.
All right.
At the end of that interview, she looked back at us and it was like, dang, y'all still ain't gonna arrest me, and just walked on out like it was nothing. I felt like it was just a waiting game. Like I knew next time I see you, I'm gonna have you in handcuffs.
There was lighter fluid that was used on the bed, the love seat, and to the wall outlet in the house. We also get the preliminary autopsy report from the medical examiner's office.
Mr. Brownlee died of thermal injuries, meaning he burned to death.
The manner of death was a homicide. Accelerant was poured all over his body as well as in his mouth. And I thought back to my conversation with Latoya about how I gave him a piece of candy.
Then he asked for a piece of candy, and I gave it to him.
There's something about this piece of candy that she claims she gave him that's not registering. And that left me wondering in my mind, okay, something else is going on here. Could it be the lighter fluid that she had put in his mouth?
And he said, I smell some smoke. I said, I smell some too.
It's one thing to burn, but to burn from your mouth and your body like that was just, what I would say is just low down. Exactly the words that her aunt said about her in that interview.
So she is evil, hateful, and low down, all of the above.
She was just this low down individual that'll do anything she had to do to get back at her husband. She didn't put up a fight, didn't argue, didn't fuss. She just put the handcuffs on and got in the car.
Capital murder is a very serious charge in the state of Mississippi. Capital murder means that, you can be sentenced to death. And she was facing that. She was facing those consequences for her actions. We was working hand in hand with the district attorney's office. This case was potentially going to trial, but I still wanted her to go ahead and give the confession. The family deserved it. The family deserved the truth about what happened to their father.
So we do got the camera on.
Okay.
Your name is Latoya Brown.
Yes, it is.
All right. You understand the charge that you have right
Yes.
now?
Mm-hmm.
What you charged with right now?
Capital.
Capital murder. I know I'm not your lawyer, Latoya. If there's anything that might help you, it's better for you to say it now than to wait on to go to court. But if you get charged with capital murder, and that's the only statute in the state of Mississippi where they will kill you. It might be 5 years after you go to jail, it might be 10, but they will kill you.
Can I talk?
Yeah, you free.
What did I have to gain by killing him? That's what I want to know.
I don't know, you tell me.
That's the reason why my parents got a lawyer. You want to know something about that? About the lawyer? They ain't give me just one. They got me 5 paid lawyers. You feel me? Put that on your recorder.
You can go and get 10 different lawyers, okay? But it don't change facts of a case. And I'm telling you, Toya, I'm telling you, it ain't looking good on your end.
And I would tell you something else regarding that situation, but I'm gonna let it all be a surprise. When I go to court, the world gonna know.
And I'm telling you, you don't want to wait on court to decide to.
Why?
Because at that point, it's gonna be pretty much too late.
No, I'm not.
I'm telling you. We seen it happen. I'm just telling you, Toya, you got a long road to travel. You feel better getting it off your chest. You really, 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 really want to get this off your chest.
Okay, first of all, first and foremost, when I first entered that house, I didn't smell no smoke. That's the first thing. I didn't smell no smoke until he told me to go and get his towel, which was by the chair, by the window. That's when I noticed some smoke. And then I went and checked the stove. I came back, it wasn't no smoke back there. It was over by his window. So whatever started, it was on the outside of that house. It wasn't nothing in that house burning.
You never told us about a fire or smoke outside of the window, but here we are now.
Why you just not telling me about this window?
I said that before. Well, I thought I did. If I knew who did this, I would say who did it. I'm not gonna go down for somebody, you know what I'm saying? I don't have no idea. I went and checked the kitchen, my bedroom, kids' bedroom, the bathroom, nothing. You think I poured some damn gas on this man? I'd be a crazy damn fool to do some stuff like that. And furthermore, this man ain't never did nothing to me for me to take his life.
Toya, I I wish you the best outcome. Life itself is too short. You might not tell me today. You might not tell me when it comes around to your court date. And I might be old and gray by the time you decide to tell what really happened that day. But like I told you, whether you got one lawyer or 5 lawyers, he don't change facts of a case. Okay?
Like I said, I didn't commit this crime, so I already know. I'm not finna go down for something I didn't do. One thing about it, God done already showed me. I'm lined up with God. He done already showed me. I'm gonna walk. I'm gonna walk. Cause when I get through pleading my case, I'm gonna walk. Believe that.
And you said you're a Christian, so I believe I can go there. God always forgive you. Or you can keep living in denial. That's between but you and God. But I can tell you, on that day, when you go to court, I hope God is with you that day. Because it ain't gonna work out the way you think it's gonna work out.
We gave her so many chances to go ahead and present the facts, but then she went back to the snoring. And so after the final interview with her, we were prepared to go to court with her and the 5 lawyers that she had. I remember when the judge, he asked her, why are you pleading guilty? And she finally said, because I did it. It wasn't a confession we dreamed of, but we got our confession. And it took going in front of the judge for her to finally admit what she had did. And that was the confession that we were wanting.
I feel like her motive was to get back at her husband. And she done that by taking his dad from him.
It was such a hard situation that affected so many different people. So many different lives were changed behind this.
He was a great guy. He was a church-going man and a great family man. So that's how the city of West Point can remember Mr. William Brownlee Sr.
On August 26, 2014, a 67-year-old man named Manfred Seal died in Germany. There was nothing about his death that seemed extraordinary. No dramatic police operation. No media frenzy. No accusations waiting to be answered. No courtroom packed with reporters eager to hear a verdict. To the outside world, his passing appeared to be the quiet conclusion of an ordinary life. Seal had worked as a gardener and cleaner. He was a husband, a father. He played clarinet and saxophone in a local band. Neighbors described him as friendly and approachable, the kind of man who blended naturally into the background of everyday life. If anyone had asked people who knew him whether they believed he was capable of terrible violence, most would likely have dismissed the idea immediately. But history has shown, time and time again, that some of the darkest secrets are hidden behind the most ordinary faces. A few weeks after his death, members of Seal's family began the difficult process that follows every funeral. Possessions had to be sorted. Personal belongings needed to be collected. Storage spaces had to be emptied. It was a practical task, one carried out by grieving relatives in countless families every year. Among those responsibilities was a rented garage located in the town of Schwalbach im Taunus. At first glance, there was no obvious reason to be alarmed. The garage was simply another piece of unfinished business left behind by a deceased family member. But as Seal's daughter worked through the contents, she encountered something that felt wrong. Inside were containers that appeared suspicious. The exact details of what she thought in that moment are unknown. We do not know whether she felt immediate fear, confusion, or simple curiosity. What is known is that the discovery was troubling enough for authorities to become involved. When police arrived and examined the contents of the garage, They found something that would transform an ordinary death into one of the most disturbing criminal investigations in modern German history. Inside the containers were human remains. Not a complete body. Not an accidental death. Not a decades-old medical specimen. The remains belonged to a woman whose body had been dismembered. Investigators quickly realized they were dealing with something far more sinister than a concealed corpse. Evidence suggested that body parts had been stored for an extended period of time. The discovery was shocking not only because of what had been found, but because of where it had been found. The remains were connected to a man who was already dead. The person who might have answered every question was no longer alive. From the very beginning, investigators faced a problem unlike those encountered in most homicide cases. Normally, when evidence points toward a suspect, detectives begin surveillance, conduct interviews, obtain search warrants, and eventually confront the individual responsible. In this case, there would be no confrontation. There would be no interrogation room, no psychological breakdown, no confession, no opportunity to observe reactions when evidence was presented. The man at the center of the mystery had already taken his final breath. Yet the discovery inside that garage was only the beginning. As investigators dug deeper, they began examining Seal's life in ways that had never happened while he was alive. They searched his possessions. They reviewed his history. They attempted to understand why a seemingly ordinary man had been storing human remains. What they uncovered would gradually reveal a portrait far different from the one known by neighbors and family members. The image that emerged was deeply unsettling. According to investigators, the dismembered remains found in the garage were not evidence of a single isolated crime. Instead, they appear to be part of a much larger pattern stretching back decades. Cold cases that had long remained unsolved suddenly demanded fresh attention. Old murder files were reopened. Forgotten evidence was re-examined. Victims whose deaths had once appeared unrelated began to share disturbing similarities. As detectives moved backward through time, they found themselves tracing a possible trail of violence extending over more than 30 years. The years rolled backward. Again and again, investigators encountered women who had disappeared, been murdered, or been found subjected to extreme acts of mutilation. Many were among society's most vulnerable people. Some struggled with addiction. Some lived isolated lives. Some worked in prostitution. Others faced personal difficulties that left them exposed to danger. And in case after case, investigators believed they saw echoes of the same offender. A recurring pattern. A recurring brutality. A recurring obsession. What made the situation even more disturbing was the contrast between the crimes and the suspect. Popular culture often encourages people to imagine serial killers as obvious monsters, isolated. Figures who appear threatening at first glance. Reality is often far more complicated. The man now linked to multiple violent crimes did not fit that stereotype. He maintained family relationships. He worked regular jobs. He participated in community life. He played music. He appeared normal. The gap between appearance and suspicion became one of the defining elements of the investigation. How could someone allegedly commit such acts while maintaining the image of an ordinary citizen? How could decades of violence remain hidden from public view? How many opportunities had existed to uncover the truth earlier? And perhaps most haunting of all, how many victims were there? That question remains one of the most difficult aspects of the entire case. Investigators ultimately linked Seal to multiple victims. They identified similarities across a series of crimes and developed a picture of what they believed had happened over the course of more than 3 decades. Yet because the central suspect died before the investigation began, absolute certainty proved impossible in many areas. There was no trial, no testimony, no confession, no complete accounting of the past. Every answer uncovered by investigators seemed to generate new questions. Each piece of evidence illuminated one corner of the darkness while leaving another untouched. The deeper detectives looked, the more they confronted the possibility that the true scale of the crimes might never be known. Some investigators believed there could have been additional victims beyond those already identified. Others focused on establishing the strongest evidence available rather than speculating beyond what could be supported. But regardless of the exact number, one fact became impossible to ignore. The discovery in that rented garage had exposed something horrifying. A man who had died as a seemingly ordinary retiree was now being examined as one of the most disturbing suspected serial killers in modern German history. The investigation would ultimately reveal allegations of extreme violence, dismemberment, the removal of body parts, and a pattern of behavior spanning more than 3 decades. It would force investigators to revisit some of Germany's most troubling unsolved murders. It would reopen wounds for families who had spent years living without answers. And yet, despite everything that followed, the case would always remain incomplete. Because at the center of the mystery stood a man who could no longer speak. Manfred Seal entered the grave carrying secrets that investigators would spend years trying to reconstruct. What began as a routine task after a funeral had become a doorway into a hidden world of violence. A rented garage, a few suspicious containers, human remains concealed from view, and the first clue in a story that would lead investigators back through more than 30 years of unanswered questions. The deeper they looked, the more disturbing the picture became. And it all started after the funeral was over. Before examining the crimes themselves, it is important to focus on the people at the center of this story. True crime narratives often risk becoming accounts of offenders, investigations, and shocking discoveries while the victims slowly fade into the background. Yet every case file begins with a human being whose life was interrupted, whose future was taken away, and whose absence left a permanent void behind. In the suspected crimes connected to Manfred Seal, investigators noticed a recurring pattern. Many of the women believed to be his victims lived in circumstances that made them particularly vulnerable. Some struggled with addiction. Some lived on the margins of society. Some experienced mental health difficulties. Others found themselves isolated in ways that reduced the protective networks many people take for granted. Such circumstances did not make their lives less valuable. If anything, they made them more deserving of protection. Yet history shows that crimes against vulnerable individuals are often among the most difficult to investigate. Disappearances may not receive immediate attention. Witnesses may be limited. Social stigma can influence public perception. In some cases, victims are remembered more for their circumstances than for their humanity. The women connected to this investigation came from different backgrounds, different years, and different personal situations. But decades after their deaths, investigators believed their cases might be connected by a single offender. The story begins in 1971. At the time, nobody could have imagined that the events unfolding that year might one day be linked to a criminal investigation stretching across more than 3 decades. One of the earliest victims later associated with the case was a young woman named Gudrun Ebel. She was 19 years old. 19 is an age often associated with beginnings rather than endings. It is an age when many people are planning their futures, building relationships, pursuing education, or imagining the lives they hope to create. Yet on February 6, 1971, Gudrun Ebel's life came to a violent end. Her body was discovered inside a garden shed in Bad Vilbel. The crime scene immediately indicated extreme brutality. Investigators found evidence that she had been subjected to severe violence. The abdomen had been opened. Most disturbingly, her uterus had been removed. At the time, investigators could not know that this detail would later become profoundly significant. Decades afterward, when detectives re-examined old cases following the discovery in Seal's garage, they began noticing similarities that had once seemed isolated. Certain injuries, certain forms of mutilation, certain recurring elements that suggested a possible pattern. Gudrun Ebel's case would become one of the earliest examples cited by investigators when reconstructing the suspected timeline of violence. Her murder remained not only a tragedy, but also a haunting question. If investigators were correct, it may have represented the beginning of a series of crimes extending across generations. Later that same year, another young woman lost her life under horrifying circumstances. Her name was Hateful Irolkaroglu. She was 23 years old and worked as a nurse. Hateful came from a Turkish immigrant background, representing one of many people helping shape modern Germany through work, community, and daily life. Her future, like Gudrun's, was abruptly stolen. She was attacked near Camberger Bridge in Frankfurt. The injuries documented in her case were severe. Investigators found evidence of catastrophic head trauma. They also documented extensive damage to her genital area. Years later, when detectives revisited the case, they saw similarities that they believed connected it to other violent crimes. The apparent sexualized nature of the injuries drew particular attention. Investigators began considering whether the same offender could have been responsible for both murders. The possibility was deeply unsettling. If true, it suggested that an individual capable of extreme violence had been operating undetected for years. Yet after 1971, the suspected trail appeared to grow cold. 2 decades would pass before another victim later associated with Seal entered the investigation. During those years, Germany changed. Cities expanded. Communities evolved. Cases remained unsolved. Families waited for answers. Then, in 1991, another woman disappeared. Her name was Gisela Singh. She was 36 years old. Gisela's life had been marked by significant challenges. She worked as a sex worker in Frankfurt's red light district. She struggled with heroin addiction. She was HIV positive. These facts often appeared in reports about her case, but they tell only part of her story. They describe circumstances, not identity. Like every victim discussed here, she was a human being with experiences, memories, fears, and hopes that extended far beyond the labels later attached to her name. On June 14, 1991, Gisela vanished. For people living in unstable circumstances, disappearances can be especially difficult to investigate. Individuals may move frequently. Contact with friends or family may be inconsistent. Delays can occur before anyone realizes something is wrong. 2 weeks after her disappearance, Gisela's body was discovered in a wooded area. The condition of the remains indicated significant decomposition. Her head had deteriorated to the point that it was nearly skeletal. Forensic examination revealed that she had been strangled. Investigators also documented severe cutting injuries affecting her abdomen and thighs. Years later, when detectives revisited the case following discoveries linked to Seal, another important detail emerged. They learned that Seal had previously been a client of Gisela Singh. This information did not provide a complete explanation of what happened. However, it established a connection that investigators considered highly significant. For the first time, a suspected victim could be directly linked to the man whose garage would later expose a hidden world of violence. 2 years later, another disappearance would add further weight to investigators' suspicions. In December 1993, a 32-year-old woman named Dominique Monrose disappeared. Dominique's life had also been marked by vulnerability. She was homeless. she struggled with drug addiction. Originally from Martinique, she was living in circumstances that made everyday survival a challenge. On December 3, 1993, she vanished. What followed was one of the most disturbing cases associated with the investigation. Dominique's body was not discovered intact. Instead, investigators found her torso inside garbage bags. Her head had been removed. Other body parts were recovered from multiple locations along a highway. The dispersal of remains suggested a deliberate effort to conceal evidence and complicate identification. Investigators examining the case years later developed another troubling theory. They believe the offender may have stored parts of the body in a freezer. According to their assessment, such storage could have allowed dismemberment activities to occur over an extended period. Whether every detail of that process could ever be fully reconstructed remained uncertain. What was clear, however, was that Dominique's death represented an escalation in the complexity and brutality of the suspected crimes. The pattern investigators were observing appeared increasingly difficult to dismiss as coincidence. Similar victim profiles, similar forms of mutilation, similar indications of extreme violence. The timeline moved forward once more to 1996. That year, another woman disappeared. Her name was Pia Isabel Haim. She was 27 years old and worked as a bank employee. Unlike some of the other victims, Pia did not come from a world of street prostitution or homelessness. However, investigators noted that she struggled with mental health issues, circumstances that may have contributed to her vulnerability. Pia vanished in 1996. The details surrounding her disappearance remained frustratingly incomplete. What made the case especially disturbing was what investigators eventually found. Only her head was recovered. It was discovered in a small garden in Frankfurt. The rest of her body was never located. This absence became one of the most haunting elements of the case. Families often describe the recovery of remains as a painful but necessary step toward understanding what happened to a loved one. In Pia's case, most of those answers never arrived. The majority of her remains were never found. Years later, investigators included her among the victims they believed could be connected to Seal. By this point, detectives examining the overall picture faced a troubling realization. The cases stretched across decades. The victims differed in age, background, and personal circumstances. Yet similarities repeatedly emerged. Extreme violence, dismemberment, missing body parts, women living in vulnerable situations, cases that had remained unresolved for years. Individually, each case represented a devastating loss. Together, they suggested something even more frightening: the possibility that a single offender had spent decades selecting victims who were less likely to receive immediate protection from society. The significance of that possibility cannot be overstated. For investigators, it transformed a collection of isolated tragedies into a potential pattern. For families, it raised difficult questions about whether answers had been missed for years. For the public, it challenged assumptions about who becomes a victim and how society responds when vulnerable people disappear. As detectives continued reconstructing the past, they increasingly viewed these women not as separate stories, but as chapters in a much larger mystery. A mystery that would eventually lead back to the seemingly ordinary man whose death in 2014 triggered everything. A gardener, a husband, a father, a musician, and, according to investigators, perhaps the hidden link connecting decades of violence. But understanding the victims was only the beginning. The next step would be examining the man himself, the public life he presented to the world, the disturbing evidence discovered after his death, and the alleged pattern of crimes that investigators believed had remained hidden for more than 30 years. By the time investigators began connecting decades of unsolved crimes to Manfred Seal, one fact stood above all others the man they were examining no longer existed as a living suspect. Every conclusion would have to be built from evidence, historical records, forensic findings, and the remnants of a life that appeared ordinary on the surface. Unlike many criminal investigations, there would be no opportunity to observe his reactions, challenge his statements, or hear his explanations. Everything detectives learned about the alleged offender had to be reconstructed after his death. What emerged was a portrait divided into two radically different realities. The first was the public image known to neighbors, friends, and family. The second was the hidden picture investigators believed had remained concealed for more than 3 decades. To understand why the case became so disturbing, it is necessary to begin with the first version of Manfred Seal, the man everyone thought they knew. In many respects, Seal appeared unremarkable. He worked as a gardener and cleaner. His daily life reflected routines familiar to countless people. He was married. He was a father. He participated in community activities. Rather than living as an isolated outsider, he maintained connections with the people around him. Those who encountered him often described him as friendly and approachable. He played clarinet and saxophone in a local band, participating in a social environment that reinforced the image of an ordinary citizen. Nothing in that public identity immediately suggested a capacity for extreme violence. This contrast would become one of the most troubling elements of the entire case. Society often searches for visible warning signs. People want to believe that dangerous individuals can be recognized through obvious behavior, strange habits, or alarming public actions. Yet many criminal investigations reveal a more uncomfortable reality. Sometimes the most disturbing crimes are committed by people who appear entirely normal. According to investigators, that may have been precisely what happened here. Behind the image of a husband, father, and musician, detectives believed another life existed, a hidden existence built around predatory violence, dismemberment, and an obsession that may have lasted more than 30 years. As investigators reviewed evidence connected to the women they believed were victims, they began identifying recurring characteristics. The suspected offender appeared to focus on women living in vulnerable circumstances. Prostitutes, drug users, and socially isolated women repeatedly appeared among the cases linked to Seal. Investigators believed this was not accidental. Vulnerable individuals often face greater risks. They may have fewer support networks. Their movements may attract less attention. Their disappearances can sometimes take longer to generate large-scale investigations. Detectives examining the pattern concluded that the offender appeared to select victims who were less protected by social structures that might otherwise increase the chances of rapid intervention. The pattern was deeply disturbing because it suggested calculation rather than randomness. Investigators believe the crimes followed a recurring sequence. According to their findings, victims were allegedly approached and taken to isolated locations. Once there, they were subjected to extreme violence. Some were strangled. Others suffered devastating physical injuries. Following death, dismemberment frequently occurred. This was not a detail limited to one isolated case. Again and again, investigators encountered evidence suggesting that bodies had been cut apart. Certain body parts were removed entirely. Some were never recovered. Others appeared to have been intentionally retained. These findings led detectives toward one of the most unsettling conclusions in the case. They suspected that Seal may have kept body parts as trophies. The concept of a criminal retaining trophies has appeared in numerous investigations throughout history. Such behavior is often interpreted as an attempt to preserve a connection to the crime or maintain psychological control over victims long after death. In Seal's case, investigators noted that different victims appeared to be missing different body parts. One victim might be missing reproductive organs. Another might be missing a limb. Another might have a different body part removed entirely. Detectives believe these patterns suggested deliberate selection rather than random mutilation. The possibility that parts of victims had been retained for years transformed the case from a series of murders into something even darker. Yet the most chilling aspect of the investigation was not simply the violence itself. It was the duration. Investigators believe the suspected crimes stretched from 1971 through at least 2004. More than 30 years separated the earliest and latest cases linked to Seal. Entire generations had come and gone during that period. Children born when Gudrun Ebel was murdered were adults by the time the final suspected victim disappeared. Governments changed. Technologies evolved. Criminal investigation techniques advanced dramatically. Yet if investigators were correct, one offender may have continued operating throughout those decades without ever facing arrest. The timeline itself became evidence of how effectively the alleged crimes had remained hidden. The earliest suspected victims dated back to 1971. Gudrun Ebel, 19 years old, was discovered in a garden shed with signs of extreme mutilation. Later that same year, Hadesi Erol was killed near Frankfurt and suffered devastating injuries. Then the trail appeared to vanish. 2 decades later, in 1991, Gisela Singh disappeared and was later found dead in a wooded area. 2 years after that, Dominique Monrose vanished, and her dismembered remains were recovered from multiple locations. In 1996, Pia Isabel Haim disappeared, with only her head ever being found. Finally, investigators focused attention on a woman who had disappeared in 2004. Her remains would eventually become the key that unlocked the entire mystery. This victim occupied a unique place in the investigation because she was not discovered through a reopened cold case. Instead, her remains were found directly inside the garage rented by Seal. In many ways, she became the bridge connecting historical suspicions to physical evidence. According to investigators, the woman was a sex worker who had disappeared in 2004. Her body had been cut into multiple pieces. Forensic examination revealed extensive dismemberment. One arm was missing entirely. Investigators also determined that some injuries may have been inflicted while she was still alive. The significance of this discovery cannot be overstated. Before the garage search, many of the older cases existed as unresolved mysteries separated by years and geography. After the garage search, detectives possessed physical evidence linking a dismembered victim directly to property controlled by Seal. This transformed the entire investigation. Suddenly, decades of unsolved murders demanded renewed attention. Investigators no longer viewed the cases as isolated incidents. Instead, they began asking whether the remains found in the garage represented the latest chapter in a much longer pattern of violence. The garage itself became a symbol of the dual life detectives believed Seal had maintained. On one side stood the public image. Friends and neighbors saw a retired man living a conventional life. On the other side stood a hidden space allegedly concealing evidence connected to murder. The contrast was almost impossible to ignore. How could someone participate in ordinary community activities while simultaneously concealing such secrets? How many times had people interacted with him without suspecting anything? How many opportunities had existed for the truth to emerge? These questions became central to the investigation. Yet as detectives continued searching Seal's property and possessions, the picture grew even darker. Investigators discovered large quantities of violent material, including images and videos. They also found documents related to dismemberment. The volume of material suggested a long-standing interest rather than a temporary curiosity. Detectives interpreted these discoveries as evidence supporting the broader pattern they were constructing. Combined with the remains found in the garage and the similarities among historical cases, The materials strengthened their belief that Seal had engaged in sustained violent behavior over many years. Still, the investigation faced an enormous challenge. Every conclusion had to be reached without the participation of the suspect. Detectives could collect evidence. They could compare crime scenes. They could identify patterns. But they could never ask the person at the center of the case why he allegedly committed these acts. There would be no explanation, no confession, no insight into motive beyond what could be inferred from physical evidence. This absence created a strange dynamic. The more investigators learned, the more questions remained unanswered. They could identify recurring behavior, but not its origins. They could recognize patterns, but not the thoughts behind them. They could reconstruct suspected crimes, but not the inner life of the man they believed committed them. By the end of this stage of the investigation, one conclusion seemed increasingly unavoidable. The discovery in the garage was not an isolated horror. It was the entry point into a hidden history of violence that investigators believed stretched across decades. A history involving vulnerable women, extreme mutilation, dismemberment, and the possible retention of body parts as trophies. Yet despite the growing mountain of evidence, the most important work still lay ahead. Investigators now faced the difficult task of proving connections between crimes separated by years, revisiting cold cases that had long gone unsolved, and determining just how many victims might ultimately be linked to the dead man at the center of the mystery. The search for answers was only beginning, and with each new discovery, the scale of the suspected crimes appeared larger than anyone had imagined when they first opened those containers inside a rented garage in Schwalbach im Taunus. Most homicide investigations begin with a victim and a search for the offender. Detectives collect evidence, identify suspects, conduct interviews, and gradually narrow their focus until the person responsible is brought before a court. The investigation surrounding Manfred Seal unfolded in the opposite direction. It began with a dead suspect and a question that seemed almost impossible to answer. What had this man done during the decades before his death? When investigators first entered the rented garage in Schwalbach im Taunus, they did not yet know they were stepping into one of the most unusual criminal inquiries in modern German history. They knew only that human remains had been discovered. Everything else would have to be uncovered piece by piece. The first priority was establishing the identity of the victim found inside the garage. Forensic specialists examined the remains carefully. The body had been dismembered. Certain parts were missing. Evidence suggested that the remains had been stored for a long period of time. This was not a recent death concealed in panic. It appeared to be something far more deliberate. As investigators worked through the evidence, they connected the remains to a woman who had disappeared in 2004. She had worked as a prostitute. Her disappearance had remained unresolved for years. Now, more than a decade later, detectives had discovered her body hidden among the possessions of a man who was no longer alive. The implications were enormous. The remains immediately established a direct connection between Seal and at least one victim. Yet investigators quickly realized that this discovery raised more questions than it answered. If a dismembered body had remained hidden in Seal's garage for years, was it possible that other crimes had gone undiscovered as well? The answer would shape the next phase of the investigation. Searches expanded beyond the garage itself. Detectives began examining Seal's property, belongings, records, and personal materials. Because the suspect was deceased, there was no need to build a case for prosecution in the traditional sense. Instead, investigators focused on reconstructing a historical record. They were attempting to understand whether the remains in the garage represented a single crime or part of a larger pattern. What they discovered deepened their suspicions. Among Seal's possessions, investigators found a large collection of violent material. Reports described vast quantities of images and videos. They also found documents connected to dismemberment, Individually, such discoveries might not prove murder. However, detectives viewed them in the context of the remains found in the garage. The combination was difficult to ignore. The evidence suggested an enduring fascination with violence rather than a brief or isolated interest. For investigators, this became an important turning point. They were no longer looking solely at the remains of one victim. They were beginning to examine the possibility of a broader behavioral pattern. The next stage involved comparing the known evidence against unsolved cases from previous decades. This process required detectives to revisit crimes that, in some instances, had remained unresolved for more than 40 years. Cold cases are often challenging because evidence deteriorates, witnesses disappear, and memories fade. Yet sometimes the passage of time allows investigators to identify connections that were invisible when cases were originally examined. That is precisely what detectives attempted to do. They began reopening files associated with women whose murders contained unusual similarities. One of the earliest cases involved Gudrun Ebel. Her body had been discovered in a garden shed in 1971. At the time, investigators documented extreme violence and the removal of her uterus. Decades later, when detectives compared her case with others linked to Seal, that detail acquired new significance. The removal of specific body parts appeared repeatedly in the investigation. Another file involved Hatice Irolkaroglu. Also killed in 1971, she had suffered severe head trauma and extensive injuries to her genital area. Again, detectives observed similarities to crimes they were now reviewing. Sexualized violence and mutilation emerged as recurring themes. The investigators were not merely looking for identical crime scenes. They were searching for behavioral signatures, patterns that might reveal a common offender despite differences in location, victim background, and circumstance. The process continued with the case of Gisela Singh. Her disappearance in 1991 had ended with the discovery of her body in a wooded area. She had been strangled and suffered severe cutting injuries. More importantly, investigators later learned that Seal had been one of her clients. This connection gave detectives something they lacked in several other cases: a documented relationship between victim and suspect. While it did not conclusively solve the case on its own, it strengthened the possibility that Gisela's death belonged within the larger pattern investigators were assembling. Dominique Monroe's case offered another critical point of comparison. Her dismembered remains had been discovered in multiple locations following her disappearance in 1993. Detectives noted similarities in the handling of the body, the deliberate separation of remains, and the apparent efforts to complicate recovery and identification. They also examined the possibility that parts of her body had been stored before disposal. This theory carried particular weight because investigators now knew that Seal had stored human remains for extended periods inside his garage. What once seemed like an unusual possibility now appeared more plausible. Then there was Pia Isabel Haim. Her disappearance in 1996 remained one of the most haunting cases under review. Only her head was ever found. The remainder of her body was never recovered. To investigators, the absence of those remains became another possible point of connection. The pattern of missing body parts appeared repeatedly throughout the cases being re-examined. One of the most disturbing observations made during the investigation involved precisely this issue. Detectives noted that different victims appeared to be missing different anatomical structures. Some victims lacked reproductive organs. Others were missing limbs. In certain cases, specific body parts had never been recovered despite extensive searches. Investigators developed a theory that would become central to their understanding of the suspected offender. They believed Seal may have retained body parts as trophies. The theory emerged from the cumulative weight of evidence rather than a single discovery. Again and again, detectives encountered signs that victims had been subjected to deliberate mutilation. Again and again, certain body parts were absent, combined with the remains found in the garage. The evidence suggested that some portions of victims may have been intentionally preserved rather than discarded. The psychological implications of such behavior were deeply unsettling. Investigators viewed it as evidence of an offender seeking continued control over victims long after death. Yet despite the disturbing nature of the theory, detectives remained constrained by a fundamental limitation. Seal was dead. There would be no opportunity to ask him about the missing remains. No confession could confirm or refute their conclusions. Every interpretation had to rest on physical evidence and investigative analysis. As the investigation expanded, authorities faced another difficult question. How many victims were there? Officially, detectives identified at least 5 women whose cases appeared strongly connected to Seal. However, some investigators suspected the true number could be significantly higher. The timeline alone encouraged such speculation. If the earliest known connection dated to 1971 and the latest victim disappeared in 2004, the period under examination spanned approximately 33 years. 33 years is an extraordinarily long time for any offender to remain active. It represented an entire criminal career hidden from public view. Some investigators believed additional victims might exist beyond those already identified. Others urged caution, emphasizing the importance of limiting conclusions to evidence that could be reasonably supported. The debate reflected a broader challenge common to many historical investigations. How should authorities distinguish between what can be proven and what appears possible? In Seal's case, the answer was especially complicated because prosecution was no longer an option. Detectives were not preparing for trial. They were attempting to establish the most accurate historical account possible. One additional case briefly attracted significant attention during this period. In 1998, 13-year-old Tristan Brubach was murdered in Frankfurt under particularly brutal circumstances. Because elements of the crime involved mutilation, investigators considered whether Seal might have been responsible. The possibility generated public interest because it seemed to fit aspects of the broader pattern. Detectives were investigating. However, the purpose of a criminal inquiry is not to confirm suspicions but to test them. As forensic evidence was reviewed, authorities ultimately excluded Seal as a suspect. Fingerprints and other forensic findings did not support the connection. By 2017, investigators formally removed him from consideration in Tristan's murder. This development served as an important reminder of the distinction between similarity and proof. Not every disturbing crime belonged to the same offender. Some connections survived scrutiny. Others did not. Throughout the investigation, detectives repeatedly confronted the limitations imposed by the suspect's death. Every new discovery reinforced a strange paradox. The evidence against Seal appeared stronger with each passing stage of the inquiry. Yet the possibility of achieving complete certainty grew weaker. The man most capable of explaining the crimes was permanently beyond reach. No matter how much evidence accumulated, some questions would remain unanswered. Why did the violence begin? Why were specific victims chosen? What significance, if any, did certain body parts hold for the offender? Were there victims who had never been identified? Were their crimes hidden so effectively that they would never be connected to the investigation? Detectives could propose theories, but they could not obtain definitive answers. By the conclusion of this stage of the inquiry, investigators had reconstructed what they believed was a decades-long pattern of violence. They identified recurring victim profiles. They documented repeated mutilation. They connected a series of unsolved murders through similarities in method and circumstance. They discovered physical evidence inside Seal's garage. They uncovered violent materials among his possessions. They established links between the suspect and at least some victims. Taken together, The evidence painted an extraordinarily disturbing picture. Yet unlike most major criminal investigations, there would be no dramatic arrest, no televised trial, no confession delivered under questioning. Instead, investigators were left with a historical reconstruction, a portrait assembled from fragments, evidence, and the silent remains of crimes that appeared to stretch across more than 3 decades. The investigation had answered many questions, but it had also revealed the true scale of the mystery. The closer detectives came to understanding Manfred Seal, the more they realized that some secrets had likely disappeared forever on the day he died. In most criminal investigations, the justice system provides a structured path toward answers. Evidence is collected, suspects are identified, charges are filed, and ultimately a trial determines guilt or innocence in a public and legally binding setting. In the case of Manfred Seal, that entire structure collapsed before it could ever begin. By the time investigators connected him to a series of suspected murders and decades of violence, Seal had already been dead for several years. He died on August 26, 2014, at the age of 67, following an illness. His death occurred before he was ever arrested, questioned in detail about the broader pattern of crimes, or formally charged in court for the majority of the cases later linked to him. This created an extraordinary legal and investigative situation. A suspected serial offender whose alleged crimes could be reconstructed but never adjudicated. There would be no trial transcript, no courtroom testimony, no cross-examination of evidence in front of a judge, and no final verdict determining legal responsibility for the wider series of suspected murders. The discovery of human remains in a rented garage shortly after his death marked the beginning of the posthumous investigation, but it also defined its limitations. The central figure in the case was permanently beyond the reach of law enforcement. Unlike living suspects, Seal could not be interrogated about specific incidents, questioned about inconsistencies in his history, or confronted with forensic evidence linking him to multiple victims across decades. Investigators were therefore forced to reconstruct his alleged actions entirely through indirect evidence. Physical remains, historical case files, forensic comparisons, and circumstantial links between victims and time periods. This method of reconstruction, while scientifically grounded, inherently lacks the completeness of a judicial process where the accused can respond to allegations. One of the most significant consequences of Seal's death before arrest was the absence of any confession or explanation. In many serial murder investigations, even partial admissions from suspects provide insight into motive, methodology, or victim selection. In this case, no such statements exist. There is no recorded narrative from Seal himself explaining why he allegedly targeted vulnerable women, why dismemberment appeared repeatedly in the suspected crimes, or whether specific cases were connected in his own mind. Every interpretation of motive remains inferential, based solely on patterns observed by investigators after his death. This absence created a profound investigative gap. Detectives could identify what they believed had happened, but not why it had happened. As a result, the psychological dimension of the case remained largely speculative, constrained by forensic observation rather than direct testimony. Equally important was the fact that no trial could take place. In a courtroom setting, evidence is tested through adversarial process. Defense attorneys challenge forensic conclusions, prosecutors present structured narratives, and judges or juries evaluate credibility and establish legal truth. None of this occurred in Seal's case. Instead, investigators and prosecutors were left with what is sometimes referred to in forensic practice as a paper reconstruction of events. Cold cases linked to Seal were re-examined, and similarities between victims were compiled into investigative reports. But these findings never progressed into a formal judicial proceeding against him personally. This meant that although authorities identified multiple victims they believed could be connected to Seal, including cases spanning from 1971 through 2004, none of these connections were ever tested in court under the standard of beyond reasonable doubt in relation to him as a defendant. The legal system requires a living subject for such adjudication, and that requirement could no longer be met. The consequences of this situation extended beyond legal procedure into the emotional reality of the victims' families. For decades, relatives of missing or murdered women had lived with uncertainty, often without knowing who was responsible or whether justice would ever be achieved. The posthumous investigation into Seal's life provided some answers, including the identification of a dismembered victim found in his garage and the reopening of several cold cases. However, those answers were incomplete. Families could be told that their loved ones were likely victims of the same offender, but they could not witness a trial where evidence was presented, challenged, and formally adjudicated. There was no opportunity for closure through verdict or sentencing. Instead, they were left with investigative conclusions that, while based on evidence, did not carry the finality of a court ruling. Investigators themselves also faced significant limitations. While they were able to identify patterns of alleged behavior, including repeated victim selection among vulnerable women, consistent use of extreme violence, and instances of dismemberment, they could not determine the full scope of Seal's actions with certainty. Official assessments suggested that at least 5 victims were strongly linked to him, while some investigators believe the number could be higher, potentially extending into double digits. However, without direct admissions or complete forensic continuity across all cases, the total number of victims remains uncertain. The passage of time further complicated the investigation. Some of the earliest suspected crimes occurred in 1971, more than 4 decades before Seal's death. Over such a long period, evidence degrades, witnesses disappear, and records become incomplete. Even with modern forensic techniques, reconstructing events from such an extended timeline presents inherent challenges. The absence of a living suspect compounded these difficulties, as investigators could not clarify ambiguities or resolve contradictions through direct questioning. In legal terms, Seal's death effectively froze the investigation at a stage of reconstruction rather than adjudication. The case exists in a unique space between criminal inquiry and historical analysis. Authorities can describe patterns, propose connections, and present evidence suggesting responsibility, but they cannot convert those findings into a formal conviction. As a result, Manfred Seal occupies a category shared by only a small number of suspected offenders, individuals whose alleged crimes are extensively investigated but never legally tested in court. This creates a lasting tension between investigative conclusion and legal resolution. On one hand, the accumulation of evidence found in his garage, the linkage to a dismembered victim, and the similarities across multiple cold cases provide a compelling narrative of repeated violence. On the other hand, the absence of judicial proceedings means that no final legal determination was ever made regarding the full scope of his alleged crimes. The case therefore remains open in a historical and investigative sense, even though the primary subject can no longer be examined. Ultimately, the story of Manfred Seal illustrates a rare and unsettling form of investigative closure without legal closure. The investigation succeeded in uncovering evidence of a hidden world that may have persisted for more than 30 years. But it failed to bring that world into a courtroom where it could be definitively judged. Instead, it left behind a reconstructed history built from fragments of evidence and retrospective analysis. Seal's death ensured that many questions would remain permanently unanswered, not because investigators lacked diligence, but because the central figure of the investigation was no longer alive to face the consequences of his alleged actions. The courtroom, in this case, never existed, and justice, if defined as a formal legal outcome, remained incomplete, suspended indefinitely at the moment of his death. When the investigation into Manfred Seal is viewed in its entirety, it does not end with a verdict, a sentencing, or a final courtroom statement. It ends with silence. Not the silence of closure, but the silence of unanswered questions, incomplete reconstructions, and a suspect who can no longer be confronted with the weight of the evidence attributed to him. Seal's death in 2014 created a boundary that no investigation, no matter how thorough, could cross. Everything that followed was an attempt to reconstruct a life that had already ended, and to understand crimes that may have unfolded over more than 3 decades without interruption. For the families of the women believed to be linked to this case, the aftermath was complex and emotionally layered. On one hand, the reopening of cold cases and the discovery of a dismembered victim in Seal's garage provided long-awaited answers. Disappearances that had once been met with uncertainty were now connected to a broader investigative framework. Names that had slowly faded into cold case archives were brought back into active discussion. In some instances, families learned that their loved ones were likely victims of a single offender whose activities spanned from the early 1970s to the early 2000s. That knowledge, while painful, replaced decades of ambiguity with a form of understanding. Yet understanding is not the same as resolution. The absence of a trial meant there was no formal moment in which responsibility was legally assigned. In a courtroom, there was no opportunity for families to hear testimony, no cross-examination of evidence before a judge, and no sentencing that marked the end of judicial proceedings. Instead, they were left with investigative conclusions, carefully constructed, evidence-based assessments that nevertheless lacked the authority of a legal verdict. This distinction matters deeply in criminal justice. A court ruling provides finality. It transforms investigation into judgment and evidence into legal truth. In the Seal case, that transformation never occurred. As a result, closure exists only in partial form. Informational closure, but not judicial closure. Investigators themselves were also left navigating the limitations of what could be proven versus what could be reasonably inferred. The evidence found in Seal's garage, particularly the dismembered remains of a woman missing since 2004, provided a direct and undeniable link between him and at least one homicide. Beyond that, the similarities across multiple cold cases suggested a broader pattern of violence. Victims shared certain characteristics: vulnerability, social isolation, or engagement in high-risk environments such as sex work or drug use. Many cases involved extreme violence and dismemberment, and several included the removal of specific body parts that were never recovered. However, despite these patterns, the total number of victims could not be determined with certainty. Official assessments suggested at least 5 strongly connected cases, while some investigators believe the number could be higher, potentially extending into double digits. But without direct confession, complete forensic continuity, or judicial examination, the full scale of the alleged crimes remains unresolved. This uncertainty is one of the defining features of the case. Unlike solved investigations where timelines are confirmed and victim counts established through court proceedings, the Seal case remains partially reconstructed. It is a historical map with missing sections, filled in through evidence and inference, but never fully completed. Another lasting consequence of the case is the unsettling contrast between Seal's public identity and the allegations constructed after his death. To those who knew him, he was a gardener, a cleaner, a husband, a father, and a musician who played clarinet and saxophone in a local band. He was described as friendly, sociable, and unremarkable in appearance. There were no obvious public indicators that he was associated with extreme violence. This contrast between appearance and allegation continues to shape how the case is understood. It challenges the assumption that dangerous behavior is always visible or detectable in advance. Instead, it reinforces a more uncomfortable reality: that individuals may maintain entirely ordinary public lives while concealing profoundly disturbing behavior in private. This duality is central to why the case continues to attract attention. It is not only about what allegedly happened, but about how it remained hidden for so long. More than 30 years of suspected activity passed without detection. During that time, investigations into individual cases failed to identify a common offender. Evidence remained fragmented across jurisdictions, decades, and victim profiles. It was only after Seal's death and the discovery in his garage that these fragments began to be assembled into a larger narrative. Even then, the reconstruction remained incomplete. One of the most haunting aspects of the case is the possibility that additional victims may never be identified. Investigators believe that the confirmed cases likely represent only part of the total picture. The timeline from 1971 to 2004 spans more than 3 decades. And within that period, there are gaps where activity may have gone entirely unrecorded or unrecognized. Some remains may never be recovered. Some disappearances may never be connected. Some victims may never be identified at all. These uncertainties are not the result of investigative failure, but of structural limitations. Time, decay, missing evidence, and the absence of a living suspect who could clarify events. The case also raises broader questions about how society responds to vulnerable victims. Many of the women believed to be connected to Seal's suspected crimes were individuals living on the margins of society. Some were involved in sex work, some struggled with addiction, and others lived in conditions of social isolation or instability. These factors may have made them more vulnerable to harm and, in some cases, may have delayed investigative attention when they disappeared. The investigation into Seal, therefore, also functions as a reflection on systemic challenges in identifying patterns of violence against marginalized individuals. It highlights how certain victims may not receive immediate recognition or sustained investigative focus, allowing crimes to remain hidden within fragmented case files for years or even decades. At the same time, it is important to emphasize what the investigation did achieve. It brought renewed attention to long cold cases. It identified a dismembered victim who had been hidden for years. It established possible connections between multiple unsolved murders. It provided families with information that had been missing for decades. Even in its incomplete form, the investigation transformed understanding of a series of cases that had previously appeared unrelated. Yet despite these achievements, the central tension of the case remains unresolved. Justice without a trial is inherently incomplete. The legal system is designed not only to identify what likely happened, but to test that conclusion in a structured, adversarial process. Without that process, conclusions remain investigative rather than judicial. They carry weight, but not final authority. In the final analysis, Manfred Seal's case is defined as much by what is known as by what will never be known. It is a case built from fragments, a garage filled with hidden remains, decades of cold cases, forensic comparisons, and investigative reconstruction. It is also defined by absence of trial, absence of confession, absence of final legal judgment. Seal died carrying whatever truth existed about his life and actions. That truth, whatever its full extent may have been, was never spoken in a courtroom and never subjected to legal examination. What remains is a reconstructed history assembled after death, carefully documented, yet permanently incomplete. The investigation stands as both a success and a limitation of modern forensic work. It demonstrates the ability of investigators to uncover hidden patterns across decades, to link isolated cases into broader narratives, and to bring long-forgotten victims back into the scope of active inquiry. But it also demonstrates the boundaries of justice when the accused is no longer alive to face it. In the end, the story of Manfred Seal does not conclude with certainty. It concludes with reconstruction, inference, and unresolved space. A man lived an ordinary public life, while, according to investigators, possibly concealing a far darker private reality. That reality was only partially uncovered after his death. And when the investigation reached its limits, it found not closure, but silence.